That was a tough set of texts. That Isaiah text and that Matthew text. Nasty, nasty stuff. You remember from last week the image from Ezekiel chapter 18 about the sour grapes. That was a text full of sour grapes, and we listened to them, and as Ezekiel said, our teeth were set on edge. Nasty texts, nasty texts. One of the things they had in common, those two texts, is the vineyard. A vineyard that somebody had worked very, very hard to plant and to tend and to get it growing and to get it going and put a fence around it and fertilized it and done all the work you have to do, made a wine press in anticipation, joyful anticipation of a harvest, so that soon there would be grapes, soon there would be wine, soon there would be production, soon there would be joy. All of this is going on, and in many ways a very hopeful sort of thing in the beginning. I don't know whether any of you have ever tried to grow grapes, whether you've tried to set up a vineyard. From what I understand, it's quite a process. It takes maybe 3 years from the time you plant those seeds to get them up to the point where they're ready to start to produce some grapes. And maybe it takes a couple more years before they're really into production. A lot of work, a lot of expense, a lot of effort, a lot of time. It goes on and on and on before the plants are now finally ready to produce their first fruit. We lived over in Gansch, north of Bloomington. I don't know whether any of you know Wally Furrow's Trucking down in El Paso. Wally got it in his head one day that he wanted to have a vineyard. And Illinois has a lot of pretty good small vineyards and small wine producers. Wally was going to join that number. And so he put, I don't know, maybe 30 acres of grapes out. Quite a few grapes. Had to do the whole thing, and a lot of that is by hand because there isn't machinery to do some of that. So you're out there working hard by hand. And I watched it just down the road a little bit from where we lived, watched them grow, and then tie them onto the trellises, and they grow a little taller, and keep tying the plants on and pruning and so on, until finally, about 3 years later, he got his first few grapes. He was happy. 4th year, a few more, and finally the 5th year, the grapes were coming pretty well into production, and he was overjoyed with the possibility now of having his own grapes to make his own wine and start selling through his little winery there. And then in the 5th year, the wine, or the grapes got some kind of a fungus, and the only way you could cope with this fungus was to rip everything out and burn it, and so he was back to zero again. This whole vineyard growing thing is quite a process. And I'm guessing that Wally could understand some of the tension that was in these texts. You get to the point where you're just now ready to celebrate this wonderful bounty of grapes and wine and all of that. You're just now ready, and something goes horribly wrong. Something goes horribly wrong. And in the story, one of the stories, the grapes turn out to be worthless. In the other story, the workers turn out to be murderous. In both cases, the owner's work and the owner's money are wasted. And the owner's rights, one way or another, are violated. And in one of the stories, the owner's son even ends up dead. In one case, the vineyard needs to be destroyed. In the other case, the workers need to be destroyed. We get to the end of the story and we say to ourselves, what's next? What's next? Because we're smart enough to know the score. We know that this is not a lesson in agriculture. We know that this is not a lesson in first century labor relations and so on. We know that there's something more going on here that we need to pay attention to. What's going on? Why does it matter? Listen again to Isaiah. Isaiah wrote, "The vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but he saw bloodshed. He expected righteousness, but he heard a cry." The text that was read from said a cry of distress. It was a cry of distress caused because there was preceding the cry of distress a cry of violence, a cry of meanness, a cry of domination, of power being used in wicked ways to accomplish wicked ends. And all of that was so thoroughly a part of the DNA of the vines that the vines had to be destroyed. That was the only way to stop it. Anybody here getting uneasy? Anybody here? Uneasy perhaps about the way the death penalty is exercised and the power of the death penalty? Anybody here uneasy about the way that economic power has been thrown about in our country through all of this foreclosure stuff and all the rest of it? Anybody uneasy about the way that political power gets thrown around as these people fight with each other about how the nation is going to be run and who's going to be president and who's not going to be president? Should those who call themselves one nation under God be uneasy when they read Isaiah chapter 5? And what about the other story? In the story from Matthew, Jesus says of this story, what I'm talking about here is the kingdom of God. I'm telling you this story so that you understand something about the kingdom of God. Kingdom of God, once again, is like a vineyard planted by a caring and tender landlord who fenced and fertilized and worked, and then finally turned this over to the tenants who would raise the crop and raise the plants to the point where they were ready to produce, maybe in 3 years or 5 years or however long it took, would raise the vines and tend the vineyard until there was time for harvest. And the years passed. They are growing years, and they are tending years. They are years of hard work, and the hard work pays off. So when the owner sends somebody to collect the rent, what happens? The tenants turned nasty. He sent someone to collect the rent, and the tenants beat the one, and they killed another, and they stoned the one after that, because they think the vineyard is now theirs. Well, after all, their sweat and their work and their time and their energy that brought this vineyard to this place, they somehow began to believe that because of all their work, it was their vineyard. So the owner tries one more time. The owner sends his son, his only son. And what happens to the son? Surely they will respect my son, he says. Surely they will respect my son, but instead of respecting him, they kill him. This is the heir. Let's kill him, and then the inheritance will be ours. But of course, soon enough, these wretches will discover how it really is going to play out. And you and I, we are not going to make their mistake. We're not going to try it their way. But have you ever noticed how we get confused when we try to answer the question, whose church is this? Whose church is this? You notice how we get confused and we struggle as we try to answer the question, whose church is this? Whose purpose do we fulfill? For whom do we produce the fruit? Anybody here getting uneasy? By now in the story, the scene is rather grim. The grapes are all sour. The vineyard is now trashed. The son has been murdered. The wicked tenants have been done away with. And maybe even our uneasiness has told us a little bit too much about ourselves. It's all been coming down to a bitter, bitter end. Except for this. Except for this. Despite all of it, this table that is laden with bread, this table that is laden with wine, fruit of the earth and work of human hands, we say. And here it is. And standing at the table, the church has always said, is the Son who had been slain, the Son who is always in the church's mind, the host at this table. And the Son who is the host says, come and eat, come and drink. And so we come. We are